Well, welcome everybody to this Scrutiny Management Committee public hearing session with the Committee for Economic Development. And today we will be focusing principally on the ferries. I'm Deputy Yvonne Burford, and with me on the panel today are Deputy Simon Fairclough, Deputy Gavin St Pierre and Principal Scrutiny Officer Suzanne Leray. A Hansard transcript of the hearing will be published in due course on the Scrutiny website, but please be advised this hearing is being live streamed. We'll take a short comfort break at about 11 o'clock. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so we would really appreciate it if witnesses could keep their answers as concise as possible. If everyone would now kindly ensure their mobile phones are set to silent, I will turn to the witnesses today, and perhaps you could please introduce yourself one by one, starting with Mr. Jones. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Gareth Jones. I'm Director of Business Economy at States of Guernsey. My role is policy and strategy development for the Guernsey economy.
Steve Wakelin. I'm the Chief Strategy and Policy Officer in the States of Guernsey.
Neil Inder, President Economic Development.
Steve Fuller, Vice President Economic Development.
Simon Steele, I'm the Commercial Director. I'm responsible for procurement.
Thank you. OK, well, we'll go straight into the questions without any further ado. The first thing, could I just confirm the name of the entity we have signed with? We realise it's Brittany Ferries / Condor, but what is the actual name going forward on the contract?
It will be, I think it's best for you to answer, it's BA.
It's Brittany Ferries and also Condor Ferries, so both parties are signatories to the agreement.
Right, OK, thank you.
Brittany Ferries provides a financial and a performance guarantee under the contract.
OK, thank you. Can you tell me, are there any break clauses or termination clauses in the contract? And if so, could you describe them?
Could we pass this one to Sarah? That's OK, please.
I'm going to introduce Sarah Hutchinson, who's going to replace Mr. Steele, I think.
Do you want to come forward to a microphone?
Yeah, come in.
Thank you.
Bring a chair there. Bring a chair there.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I have the contract here. There is the contract is a 15-year term. There is a break clause in favour of the states at year 8 on giving two years' notice. And that's to enable, if discussions about commercial investment aren't satisfactory to the states, to enable the states to make an early exit from the contract if it needs to.
So 2 years' notice would have to be given at year 6, do you mean?
Year 8. No, it's
at year 8
and
it for a break at year 10.
Yeah.
OK, thank you.
Sorry, do you mind if I ask something?
No, please do.
So the reference to commercial investment, presumably that's a reference to refleeting in some...
Yes, it's retonnaging, and it's not the reference. So there are two parts to investment. So there is a fixed investment, which is refurbishing, but then which is in one schedule, which must be done, and that's mandatory, whatever happens. There is a provision for the parties to have discussions about commercial arrangements to fund retonnaging. So it's only retonnaging that would apply to.
Thank you. What are the provisions for extending the contract beyond 15 years?
There's a provision at the state's discretion, absolutely, to extend for a 5-year period and a further 5-year period at its discretion. Right,
OK, thank you. So what performance criteria would be required to be met in order to extend the contract?
This one. Yeah, so there's a detailed KPI schedule within the contract. So the states at that point in time would make a determination based on the performance of the operator, the investments that have been made at that point in time, as to whether or not it's in the best interest of the states to take the decision to extend.
May I add as well, if it's okay?
Yes.
The intention is to publish the performance against the KPIs on an annual basis.
Thank you. And of course, there's no obligation, however, for Brittany Ferries to extend if they don't want to.
That's correct. It's at the discretion of the states.
OK, thank you. So, Jersey claimed in a public hearing that it had, quote, massive concerns with Brittany Ferries Condor, particularly around the technical, the commercial, the financial aspects of their proposal. I mean, that on the surface sounds pretty damning. Presumably Guernsey does not have any of those concerns.
I can answer politically. We I gave well, let's start from October the 10th. And October the 10th was the day when our committee sat, including our NSMs, to give an indication of the likelihood of where we thought the decision-making process was going. And what I mean by that, Deputy Burford, what the scrutiny hearing needs to realise is that a lot of the work from the previous 10 months had been conducted by myself as political lead and a number of officers. So it's incumbent upon me to provide that information, at least to the point where I thought we had got to my committee, because ultimately they would be the final arbiters of any final decision. We then set a meeting for the 17th, where the final decision would have been made, and that is the point that decision was made. The financial schedules were presented to the committee, and the committee understood that there were some risks, but ultimately the final decision was, or rather the primary decision was the disqualifying bid. That was the main issue that stopped our committee from being able to make that decision in favour of another company.
Okay, but I don't think that's quite the point I'm getting to. Jersey have said that there were massive concerns with three particular points: technical, commercial and financial, to do with aspects of Brittany Ferries' proposal. I just want to know that you are comfortable that you don't have those concerns.
We don't, and I can explain why. After the 17th of October, we had made our decision and we had communicated that to Jersey. On Friday, I took a telephone call from Deputy Morrell, who expressed some surprise that we'd made the decision on the 17th. I'd reaffirmed with him, just to assist him, is that we repackaged the financial position over the weekend and reshared it with the committee. Not that it would have particularly changed the decision, just to assist the other partner in the process. We'd repackaged the appendices to the 17th of October report and asked my committee to make a final confirmation whether they were satisfied with the financial position of the preferred bidder, and they all agreed with they reaffirmed their decision of the 17th.
Okay, I think Mr. Wakelin's eager to come in here.
No, it was just to add, if I may. So what was shared, Deputy Ian is absolutely right, was also so that the committee could see the rationale for the evaluators coming to the decisions it had come to, because the pair of evaluators, one from Guernsey, one from Jersey, who'd looked at the financial aspects of the tender, had both passed it through that. So it passed the financial standing test through both islands evaluators. And what we were sharing with the committee was the rationale certainly from the Guernsey evaluators as to why that decision was made and what backed it up.
Okay, well, they also made, I'm sorry to labour this question, but they also made, expressed concerns about commercial and technical aspects. And it just seems very strange to me that there's such a big difference between the viewpoint of both islands on Brittany Ferries.
So just to reinforce what Steve Wakelin's just said, both evaluators from both islands passed Brittany Ferries on the financial evaluation. In respect of the commercial evaluation, there were differences in the scoring between the islands. The Guernsey team scored Brittany Ferries more favourably than DFDS in respect to the commercial evaluation. And this came down to principally the certainty around the investment plan. And in particular, there's been quite a bit in the public domain around these so-called 5 commercial levers. So these were the ability for DFDS to apply one of 5 commercial levers. And the effect of that was that it undermined substantively their bid. So they were able to change both the freight and the passenger pricing. They were able to change the minimum service requirements. They were able to change the sailing schedules. They were able to defer investments for 12 months. And they were also able to exercise a contract extension for 12 months. So they had the ability to apply any of these levers. And the consequence of that in this commercial evaluation part was effectively to undermine large swathes of the rest of that bid. So in our view, in our professional view, in our judgment, that made the DFDS bid unacceptable. And for that reason alone, we scored the commercial evaluation quite poorly in respect of DFDS. Jersey did not get to that same conclusion in respect of that. In respect of the technical evaluation, again, there was a principal point of difference, and this was in respect of the useful economic life of one of the vessels at the back end of the contract. However, the States of Guernsey, we judged that both bids would be marginal in terms of meeting the useful economic life test at different points over that contract period. Again, there was some difference between the way in which we evaluated it technically and the way in which Jersey evaluated it technically. We did get to different scores in respect to that evaluation. However, as we were scoring jointly, we took an average of the two scores through. And so on that basis, both the technical evaluations and the commercial evaluations passed for both bidders based on the average scores as set out in the evaluation criteria.
Okay, so, I mean, you're telling me a lot about why DFDS didn't get it, but I'm really asking specifically about Brittany Ferries at this point, because that was in Jersey's claim during their public hearing, where I think it was the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development said that the island had massive concerns with Brittany Ferries around these three areas. That's what I was just wanting to be assured that perhaps that we don't have those concerns, but more to the point, it's not just a case that they're not as bad as you believe DFDS to be, but they are absolutely fine for us to go forward into a 15-year contract with.
So in respect to the technical evaluation, it was Jersey's view that the Brittany bid did not meet the useful economic life test on, I think, one of the vessels towards the end of the life of the contract. Their other principal point of concern was in respect of the financial evaluation, and it was that element really more than anything else, and that played also into their commercial evaluation.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes,
right,
please.
it's important. I think I mentioned it in the States at last meeting. I think it was some questions from Deputy St Pierre over the five levers. The derogations did two things. Under the Brittany Ferries bid, there were no such derogations. So effectively, for the first time for a long time, come January the 1st, we will actually have a contract when we're currently working under an MOU. So that risk has been mitigated. We now have a contract with a supplier which we haven't had. And importantly, if we'd gone down around the potential accepting the five levers route, the risk would be shifted to the people of Guernsey and Jersey. And that is significant. If you can start changing your scheduling, your prices and your investment, the risk changes immediately to the people of the islands. Whereas under the current bid, all of that is wrapped up in a contract and
yeah, we'll be coming on to pricing and such like in due course, but thank you for that clarification. Please do.
Because I think there are a few questions which probably fit in better now in light of the conversation so far. Just picking up on Mr. Steele's point about the commercial differences, you referred to the certainty of investment, so that it was one of the comments you made. Were you implying that Jersey reached a conclusion that the other bidder gave greater certainty of investment than Brittany Ferries? That was their assessment. Is that what you were implying?
We assessed that Brittany Ferries gave much greater certainty of investment. So again, I refer back to these five levers. The reason we scored the DFDS bid poorly in respect to the commercial element was principally due to the application of these five levers, which had the effect of undermining the rest of the bid. I need to be careful about speaking on behalf of Jersey, but I think they didn't feel it was as relevant or material perhaps as we did, that element.
Fine. And just to be very, very clear, the contract does not provide Brittany Ferries or Condor with any levers in relation, because my understanding is the prior contract, or the MOU, did have a right of variation to protect the profitability with some concept of kind of tram lines. And is there any kind of concept in the contract that deals with that? And if so, how does that differ from the DFDS levers?
Sarah Hutchins was going to answer that question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
It's about clause 44 and about Schedule 15, there is a change control procedure in the contract with Brittany Ferries because it is a 15-year contract. So that caters for things like changes in the law or things which are outside of the bidder's control. It doesn't give any grounds for a unilateral type change by the bidder, but it does give them, if the law was to significantly change, it opens the door for a discussion, and then the parties have to agree a change as a result. That mechanism also entitles the states, so the bidder can request a change, and based on a change in law, that could be agreed, but it isn't for their profit levels or anything like that. It is quite different. It's a very standard form of change control mechanism. It also allows the states to request and insist on a variation subject to the parties working out what the implications of that variation would be. That's all very standard. That's very different, and that's all very usual in a long-term contract. It's very different to the 5 levers as proposed, which were a unilateral right for one party of the contract, which is very unusual, and I have never seen anything like that before.
So what are the provisions, if any, in the contract if it proves to be less profitable and therefore less sustainable for Brittany Ferries Condor? There's no provisions that.
That's not open to them. So they would be able to. If it was less profitable because of a change in law which didn't exist at the time they entered into the bid, but the point is all of the parameters that exist at the day we enter into the bid, they are as set. There is an understanding about the level of volume. So if a radical change in volume, for example, if the freight was abstracted to other routes, that may have implications, but nothing about profit whatsoever, no.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
So all previous investigations in recent years by the states concluded that a Guernsey-only service with just 32% of the Channel Islands freight market was not financially viable. Even taken with Jersey, the Channel Islands have generally been seen to be a subscale route structure. So can you tell me what has changed?
Under the ITT process, there was an ability for both islands actually to partially award the routes. Obviously, Guernsey and Jersey would look at their northern and southern route, and as we would as well. Now, I can't reference those reports because I don't have them in front of me. But quite clearly, Brittany Ferries have agreed that a Guernsey-only service is viable, and it is true that it would be better for any business to have a larger chunk of a market which is within 22, 23 miles of each other. But quite clearly, we now have an agreed contract where Brittany Ferries have disagreed with that state's position, because they are more than happy and it's been more than accepted that they are happy to provide the Guernsey-only service.
And there may be commercial considerations for them as well that are relevant. So, for example, they have the infrastructure in place relatively locally, regionally. They have relationships with the ports. They have relationships with freight providers as well. So from their perspective, it might be viable. It doesn't mean it would be viable necessarily for another operator that didn't necessarily have those things.
So it's essentially adding to their existing route network in the area?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it, yeah.
Right, okay, thank you.
Could I just ask Mr. Wakeland a supplementary question on that? Have Condor Brittany Ferries given any undertaking as to the size of their staff, office and operation that will be maintained in Guernsey during the contract period?
No, they haven't. I think it's clear that it's a very different approach to what the original tender was for. I suspect as a business they'll need to make some commercial and financial and operational decisions. Obviously, with the ownership changing relatively recently as well, and Brittany Ferries having a much larger stake in Condor Ferries, that might change things too. But no, there's nothing that I'd be able to kind of recite with any assurance, Deputy Fairclough, no.
That actually segues nicely into my next question, for which thank you. For you just to outline what the current ownership structure of Condor is, because clearly it has been subject to change. We know that Brittany Ferries are now the majority owner, but I think it would be interesting to understand what the current ownership of Condor is, and indeed of Brittany, because that also has changed, and that must have been also part of the evaluation. So can you just describe to us your understanding of the ownership structure of both?
I'm not sure I've got all of those details But my understanding is Brittany is 51% shareholder currently in Condor.
There's a refinancing process that will go forward further to the outcome of this tender. Originally, obviously, it was planned around the two markets. Now it's around one market. We're having some discussions at the moment with the owners, with Brittany Ferries and with Condor Ferries board as well, and with the lenders who are part of the conversations. So what we could do is probably share in writing something with a bit more detail, probably towards the end of this week, if that was okay with the panel.
Is that the nature of that refinancing the terms of the debt, or does it envisage more of a debt equity swap?
I think it's more in terms of the debt, but again, I'd rather come back in writing with some clarity on that. There are some further meetings this afternoon, for example. As well.
Okay, and the other 49%.
Well, the other 49% at the moment of Condor Ferries would be with Columbia Threadneedle.
Okay, the previous.
That's right. Yeah,
fund
previous
manager.
majority. Yeah.
And the ownership of BF.
The ownership of BF, as I understand it, is
it's a mixture of French farmers and cooperatives. That's ultimately how British Ferries is ownership.
Yeah, just quickly on the ownership of Brittany Ferries. I mean, I don't have the precise detail, but it is the French farmers and so on. But there is provision in the contract in terms of change of control. So any change to the control of either of those businesses would be a termination event potentially under the contract. So we would not expect to see anything like Brittany Ferries being sold off to private equity under the terms of this contract.
So just to be clear, that change of control wouldn't trigger termination of the contract, but it would trigger an opportunity for
opportunity to exactly to consent.
Okay.
But the right to do so.
Yeah, fine. Thank you very much.
If it's helpful, we could share the relevant clauses as part of the note on that.
Thank you very much. That would be helpful. Thank you. I think I've dealt with the next two, Chair.
We've got question 7 you've dealt with.
Yep.
So what bearing did the ownership and leasing arrangement of the Islander have on your decision to go with Brittany Ferries Condor, and did it play any part in your thinking?
Yeah, this has been playing via social media for a very long time. I've confirmed in writing, I think 3 times now, that the ownership of the Islander under its special purpose vehicle played no role whatsoever in our committee's decision making. Okay. None whatsoever. It didn't come in front of us. We never discussed it. It wasn't in any other side conversation that we all had a coffee over. It just didn't exist. We made our decision, and bear in mind, Madam Chair, that it was a unanimous decision. We made the decision based on the information in front of us, which was all wrapped around the response to the RFP and the ITT process. That was it. I will have to repeat it again. I've had to put another media statement out, but it played no role, no part in decision making whatsoever.
Could I add, this is a point that I specifically raised at one of the briefings from officers to the committee, and I was told that it played no part in the tender process and that it should be forgotten about and not raised as being material to any decision that we might make.
Yeah, just to add to that, just to clarify, it didn't form part of the tender evaluation whatsoever. It was not a consideration within the tender evaluation whatsoever. So there was nothing which referenced Islander in any way, shape or form in any of the tender documents or in any of the evaluation process.
Can I just add something to this? And this is important. I think if this, I think you as members of the states will understand, but I think the wider public need to understand as well. It is true that the Condor brand has had problems over the past few years, but that's not our job. In terms of looking at the responses to the ITT, we have to look at the bids as they come in through the door. We are not in a position to add any weight, subjectivity, emotion, conjecture to what has basically gone before. That is not our role. We have to look at this as a clean sheet, and both bids came in through the door. They went through evaluation period, they went through a moderation, there was output and there was a decision. We gave no consideration whatsoever to what has gone before. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Can I just sorry, it does help, but to be clear, I mean, the existence of the Islander must have been pertinent and relevant because it's clearly one of the ships that was available to potentially service the contract. So
I can answer that question.
I haven't finished. I haven't asked a question yet. Can I ask a question?
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Would you like to tell me what the question was? So yes, so it must have been relevant to the evaluation of the contract in that sense. But is what you are saying that actually it's the ownership of that through the SPV and the leasing of that through the SPV was not relevant in any way, shape or form, but the availability of the ship would have been relevant. Is that a correct understanding?
That's the question I thought you were going to ask, but I just said it slightly differently. What was relevant, there's no two ways about it. The Islander exists. It is in a special purpose vehicle. It is under contract to the incumbent. I think what's important is that while we knew. While the old Condor had declared that it was having temporary financial issues, which I think was issued in January of this year, in those conversations, to show Guernsey's openness and to deflect some of the cynicism coming from the other island, our government informed Jersey before agreeing to the RFP and the eventual ITT, that whatever happened, we would try our damnedest to make sure the Islander was available to both islands. It may be owned by Guernsey stroke the previous entity, but we weren't going to play be childish in any way. Should anything catastrophic have happened, the Islander would have been made available to Jersey as well. And that shows the maturity of the decision-making of this island and my committee. Thank you.
Mr. Wakeling.
Sorry. If another bidder had put forward that it wished to deploy the Islander, it would be treated as any other vessel that any other bidder would talk about that wasn't under its control or ownership, that it was something it had an interest in. From a States' perspective, clearly if a contract with the current operator of it was to come to an end, or actually there isn't a contract, but the current arrangement was to come to an end, then it would be in the States' interest through the SPV to then discuss the potential for deploying that with another operator. And if there was another operator that didn't want Islander, then the States could make a decision on how best it divest of that asset. So
had you gone with the FDS, the States would then have had to decide what it wanted to do with what would have essentially been a surplus vessel.
That's right.
Thank you.
So Mr. Steele wants to come in.
Well, I'm not sure there was an awful lot more to add other than to say that, of course, as part of the evaluation process, it was absolutely pertinent that we looked at availability of vessels and the certainty of the security that the operator had over those vessels. So that very much formed a key part of the evaluation, generally speaking.
So there are two other sort of supplementaries which have emerged from the responses you've given. Would you like to have a guess at what they are? It was to make the point that obviously the financing and charter costs for Islander will obviously have formed part of the cost base for the provider for Condor stroke Brittany as the bidder, and so that would have been part of an evaluation somewhere, would it? How would that have been captured? That's the first question.
So I'll try and answer this as best I can. All three operators that submitted a bid were required to submit a detailed financial model. So lease costs, charter costs, and any other financial cost formed part of that financial model. So in that respect, those models were evaluated, and were tested both in terms of the financial viability of the operator, but also, of course, we were looking at the investments in fleet. We were looking at charter costs to see whether they were appropriate. We were also looking at refurb costs, things like that. So the financial evaluation team looked at all aspects of finances, not just charter costs, but charter costs obviously formed a part of that.
Presumably that also includes looking at the cash flows and the repayment of debt as well, rather than simply the costs.
That's correct, and there were a number of financial tests that were undertaken as well in respect to that. I think there were 5 or 6 financial tests that were applied to each of the operators.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Wakeland's response just sparked a question in my mind, which was the suggestion that there currently wasn't a contract in relation to Islander. He referred to an arrangement.
No, sorry, I meant there wasn't a contract in relation to the States and Condor ferries previously. That was the point,
okay.
yeah.
So to be clear,
there is a
charter agreement.
Yeah, there absolutely
because I would have
is.
been surprised if there hadn't been.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay. Thank you.
That was an easier question than I expected, actually. That was. Thank you. My mistake.
To answer the more difficult one.
No.
Right, so having rejected DFDS on a technical fail, what competitive element was left to ensure Brittany Ferries offered us the best possible deal when they must have known that we had no choice but to go with them?
I don't think that's how it's played out. We made a decision, and we appointed Brittany Ferries on a Guernsey-only service, which they would have accepted. So I don't think there was, and it's worth pointing out, there was no separate negotiation. We took the portion of the ITT and applied that to the current contract. So I'm not, with the greatest respect, I don't entirely understand what the question is getting at, because in my view, there wasn't any there wasn't room for Brittany Ferries to negotiate, with the exception of its losing effectively 2/3 of the market. So I'm not entirely clear what the relevance of the question.
When the if I may add to that, when the joint bid, it was clear it was not going to be progressed any further, given the Government of Jersey's position. What was then issued to Brittany Ferries was a request for them to look at what they'd already submitted and advise where the difference might be. In that, I think the minimum service requirements and the service scheduling was still met. Mm-hmm. The only area of difference, as you've already put on, was the fleet investment plan, in particular the retonnaging. That is, I would say, the primary area of difference. The rest of any other differences, I don't think are material at all, actually, to the overall service and pricing. The pricing remained the same, for example, as well.
Okay, what was when you embarked on this process and there were two bidders, what was the contingency plan if neither of them had met the standards or had failed?
Well,
I think you're going to have to.
well, I think to be absolutely fair, both bidders, as we were going through the process, had put together cases that would suggest that we would be able to make a decision as both governments, ideally as both governments with the same outcome. However, what we did do in the background was make sure that whichever bid was we were to go with, if it was down to the final two, that there was contingency for whatever the outcome of that. So, for example, if the successful bid had been DFDS's, there would have been some contingency planning with Jersey around how we would manage that transition to minimise disruption to services over that period. And clearly with Brittany Ferries, one of the things that we're now not doing is the contingency that was in place during 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think, again, these questions probably follow on quite neatly. So it's just really understanding at what stage in the tender process did it, and it may be that Deputy Inder's already hinted at this, around the 10th, 17th of October. So what stage was it the possibility of the islands being served by separate ferry operators, actually, when was that considered to be viable? When was it? Yeah.
When it was likely to happen, or the viability?
The viability of it, when it was realised that Guernsey was heading towards the conclusion, based on the tender process, that it was going with Brittany Ferries, but clearly Jersey were heading somewhere else, then the viability of the route, or the viability of whether that was sustainable, when was that judgment taken?
I can answer the likelihood. Mr. Wakeland can probably answer the viability. It depends which one you want to hear first. Do you want to do the viability, and I'll do the likelihood?
Yeah.
Who needs more time?
What I was going.
Well, he'll be more succinct than me.
Well, I guess we'll find out. So I think it was clear when the evaluation was closed on the 17th of October by both SROs, so myself and my counterpart in Jersey, who'd been the SRO there, that the scoring meant that under clause 36.1 of the tender document that both islands had agreed, that we only had one submission on the table. And it was a matter, therefore, of whether we both, as islands, felt that that was the position that we wanted to maintain. I think from my perspective, in terms of whether that was going to be a position that the Government of Jersey adopted, clearly there were exchanges of emails between officers over the course of that week, which suggested there might be a divergence, which was one of the reasons why a paper was taken to the Committee for Economic Development on the 17th of October. Not that much earlier than had probably been planned, but I think it was felt it was important to accelerate it. In terms of the viability of that, well, clearly from our perspective, we went into the tender process wanting a single solution for both islands. I think that was very clearly Jersey's view as we worked through the process as well, and the way the evaluators worked together. But it was clear that at some point during the course of sort of around 17th, 18th, 19th of October, as things were developing, that we were going to have to consider what a Guernsey-only service might look like. And that was why we started thinking around whether we submitted or asked Brittany Ferries, as the only successful bidder in the process, what their submission would look like if it was a Guernsey-only service. Now, clearly, I can't speak for Brittany Ferries any more than Simon said he can't speak for Jersey, but I think Brittany Ferries and DFDS went into the process wanting to serve both islands as well. So it was quite a significant shift at that particular time, and not entirely expected.
So just to be clear, there were not separate bids submitted as part of the ITT process. It was a single bid for the Channel Islands market.
Absolutely.
And at some point after the 17th, or around the 17th, the conclusion was that Brittany were to be the winner of that process as far as Guernsey was concerned. But when it became clear that Jersey wasn't going to go with that, then presumably it then became necessary to reevaluate the viability of a Guernsey-only service from the preferred bidder.
Yeah, I think there's the political conversations that.
Well,
but there's what the officers are doing in the background to make sure that whatever eventuality, and we started that early, but we hadn't done it. There was no great amount of work that had been done on the viability of a Guernsey service from the Brittany Ferries submission. At that stage, it was something that we needed to do very quickly. We'd been planning on a joint.
Because it does sound like it would have needed to be done very quickly.
It was done very quickly. So we asked Brittany Ferries to submit a revised financial model, which showed the viability of a Guernsey-only service, and that was done quite quickly. But under the rules of the tender, so right up to certainly Friday the 11th of October, it was absolutely clear. There was nothing to give anyone any view that the islands would be going separate ways. We were having very regular calls. The senior officers were having regular calls. It was very much looking like we were both bound effectively by the evaluation and the outcome of that evaluation. Things changed very quickly around Monday the 14th, Tuesday 15th of October, and it was only at that point really that it looked on the face of it that although we felt we had a very clear outcome based on the evaluation. That we may end up going our separate ways. But under the rules of the tender, of course, you do have the ability, and this is quite normal. You have the ability to accept the tender either in full or in part. Okay, and that's what we've leaned on effectively.
Okay, so to be clear, the tender documents didn't invite or provide for a tender for the sole route for the
single bid covering both islands, but the minimum service requirements, for example, the schedules as set out, clearly show a distinction between services operating to and from Jersey and including Jersey, and those that include Guernsey as well. So there is an ability to effectively separate it out, but it was a single bid. Okay.
When it became so, although as you said under the rules of the tender, you have chosen to accept the tender in part. Actually, the original tender, being for the Channel Islands route as a whole, had failed to deliver a single. It failed to deliver a result for the Channel Islands market.
Well, no, it definitely did deliver a result.
Well, not one that was not one that was acceptable to both islands.
That's correct.
So,
but to your point earlier, Deputy Burford, if I may, Deputy St Pierre, the bid that was on the table was a good bid. And we felt was worthy of exploring further to get into to put in place a contract of the 15 years with Jersey. So we felt there wasn't a sort of sense of, well, we've only got this one now, what are we going to do? There was a bid with many merits. And
as part of that process, somewhere between the 14th of October and the time that the decision was made to accept the Guernsey-only bid from Brittany Ferries after they'd submitted a revised financials, was it part of the? Was there ever any consideration given to effectively doing what Jersey did and reopening the tender process just for a Guernsey only?
Absolutely not.
Just for a Guernsey only service.
Absolutely not. There was there was a discussion post 17th with the external relations. Well, basically. With Jersey's external relations and their chief minister, of which Deputy Trott and our Deputy Latoc was included, and we made it clear that the two SROs, one of which had been recused recused himself with the new SRO, we were requested by Jersey to effectively see if we'd hit an impasse. Jersey at that point had not made a determination. It simply had not made a determination at all. And I think there was a bit of work being done by our chief ministers on external relations to see if we couldn't get into some form of moderation. The conversations happened, but I believe the SRO that had been recused, the replacement SRO, probably really wasn't up to speed, but we made it absolutely clear that we would not reopen the evaluations. We simply wouldn't have done that.
There was no basis really on which to reopen the tender process. So the scoring, the evaluations, the moderations had been structured. It had been Guernsey and Jersey working together. The procurement team was working together as well from both islands. So there wasn't really any basis on which we could justifiably reopen a tender process. And you might argue that that's actually a greater risk, because having gone through such a public process and a lengthy process and a very diligent and thorough one, and a not inexpensive one to do, to get to the end with a clear outcome and then to decide, well, actually, that's not where we want to be and collapse. That I don't think we would have found that there was any justification for that whatsoever. And I would say it was only really the decision that the committee made, if I may, Deputy and Deputy Followers, in terms of supporting the bid for the Pan-Island service that had come from Brittany Ferries. Yes. And that was what had been put to Jersey in writing. And it was the discussions around whether that position was going to be acceptable for both islands that then happened. It was only in the background as those conversations happened that officers started to see potentially the need to think around what might happen if there wasn't an agreement at that stage. But I have to be honest, as the SRO of it, I haven't had an explanation, or there's no clarity for me in terms of what it is that's led Jersey to feel that the first tender process should have kind of, I guess, be stopped, collapsed, or that it was broken in any way.
Both governments agreed to close the evaluation process. Once the evaluation process is closed, there was no mechanism within that tender to reopen it, and actually there was no good reason to reopen it, and nor there was a good reason to abandon the process.
From a political perspective, we had every confidence in the process and in the officers and the way in which they conducted it. There was never a question of being able to start again if we didn't like the answer. The answer was the answer. And we were fully supportive, having been briefed along the way about the robustness of the whole process, with no political bias or leaning or pushing or advice to officers. The answer was the answer. And that's where we stood by it.
I fully understand that in relation to 100% of the Channel Islands market, but when you're then only faced with a third of that, just really understanding whether there was whether the answer was still the same answer for only a third of the market, based on effectively you having asked them to resubmit financials based on a third of the market, as opposed to re-tendering just that third of the market. So it's really understanding. I understand the process was what it was. It reached a conclusion, and therefore everybody was going with that. But actually, the rules of the game were changed by factors beyond Guernsey's control, and therefore, query should we? And this, in essence, is the question: should we then have said, okay, this process has fallen apart, it hasn't delivered what we tendered, should we re-tender for just the 1/3 of the market?
I thought I answered that in a previous question. The committee could partially award the contract,
yeah.
And I've explained that Brittany Ferries accepted the partial award. They're happy to supply a Guernsey-only service, and we've signed a contract. So that, I think, for the second time, probably answers your question, that the one of the bidders is happy to work on a Guernsey-only contract, and that's a position that we've adopted. And the first time in a long time, we've actually got a contract. Working under an MOU was horribly risky to Guernsey. We've got potentially more tourism opportunities coming directly from France. We've got a flatter rate card on freight. We're expecting more people, or a greater percentage of the freight service will be able to access that rate card. So I think Guernsey, given that it is a smaller market, it is, I can't deny that, I'd be a fool to suggest otherwise. I think Guernsey is in as good a position as it possibly could have got, given the circumstances, to reopen or go down the Jersey route of opening a tender process was never a consideration by this committee.
Okay. Thank you.
No, it was really just to add to Deputy in this point. I think to your question, Deputy St Pierre, if what had come back from Brittany Ferries on a Guernsey-only service had been so different from what their original submission had put forward, that it wasn't going to be viable operationally or whatever, then I think at that stage that might have been a consideration to make. But that wasn't the case, as we talked about.
You wanted to add something?
Just to add, really, I think what's transpired is highly unusual within the context of a procurement process. However, there's no good reason to abandon the process. In our view, the outcome was clear. We had a compliant bid from Brittany Ferries. It was the winning bid. It was capable of acceptance, so there was no good reason why you would abandon a bid. You'd only normally abandon a bid if there was a bid that wasn't capable of acceptance or wasn't compliant. That wasn't the case in this set of circumstances.
I just wanted to ask a question about timescale, because of something that Mr. Steele said, but also referring back to a point that you made, Deputy Ender, about the time that was given to Brittany Ferries to come back then with a Guernsey-only proposal. How long were they given to do that?
It was around a week. It happened very quickly.
I mean, the point that Deputy St Pierre's made, in the grand scheme of things, that is a very short space of time. Was that sufficient time for that bid to be sort of bottomed out? Or were you feeling under pressure to make a decision quickly at this stage?
Well, to answer the political decision, I don't think we were under any pressure whatsoever. We had been assured that the Guernsey-only service was viable by Brittany Ferries, so we were quite. I mean, I can't say I wasn't disappointed, because I think a Pan-Channel Island, would have been better for the whole of the business rather than having two. I can't say I was disappointed, but we were satisfied, the committee is satisfied, and basically because Brittany Ferries has told us they were happy to provide that service, that a Guernsey-only service was viable and would work. I hope that answers your question, but Mr. Wakeland might...
All I'm trying to establish really was a week long enough to provide the detail that would give you the reassurance that this was a viable service moving forward?
A week was long enough for Brittany Ferries to come back with the revised response. But there were then further conversations. So it wasn't that what came back then wasn't interrogated. There were further conversations with as a business and an assessment of that against the same criteria. So the week was what they were given in order to respond. But that conversation then happened as various officers, again, challenged the various parts of it. And also in that context, just to say that what the states of Guernsey and Economic Development had said to Jersey was this was the preference at the end of the joint process. That didn't get into the public domain, as I recall, and I appreciate that's not the question, David Feckler, but for a couple of weeks. So there were also still lots of conversations happening politically that may or may not have changed the outcome of that process as well, of the original process.
Yeah, just on that point about what the understanding was with Jersey at the outset of the process, what was the understanding then, that if if it did not produce a single outcome. Was there any consideration of that? Was that part of...
I can sort of answer that. I don't think there was anything that said basically, and what will happen at this point, we will all get in a room and make a decision and take it to our respective committees, of which Jersey doesn't have, because Jersey doesn't have a committee, it's under an executive government. And this week between the sort of 10th and the 17th and the 18th is really quite fundamental to the decision-making process, because there was a narrative after our decision that wasn't quite coming out of the other island, which wasn't quite how we saw it. And if I may, Deputy Burford, I've explained that on the 10th of October we had a summary of the two main bids from TFTS and Brittany Ferries. And I felt, and still do, that I had, there may be political differences, I had a strong relationship with Deputy Morell, bearing in mind he is going to do the best thing for his island, as I will do for our island. So I tried extremely hard between the 10th, in the 3-day period, to get hold of Deputy Morell to at least give him the courtesy that our committee had a summary of the two main bids, and I wanted to go, and those conversations. In short, there was no response. There was a couple of telephone calls, a few texts, and there was no response. There may have been reasons for that. 15th of October is actually quite crucial, because on the 15th of October, Jersey's SRO advises Mr. Wakeland by email, and I'll quote: "We, Jersey, are now on course for a Council of Ministers meeting on Monday of next week." And that being Monday, 21st of October, and for the sponsoring minister to have determined an outcome by Thursday, Friday of this week, 17th of 18th, so as to sponsor that Council of Ministers discussion. Now that genuinely surprised me, because it felt like, and within the same email, Jersey, I believe, and without wanting to misquote, I think Mr. Wakeland may agree, that they reserve the right to either take the blended the blended scoring or go with the Jersey scoring. You're nodding.
It was a suggestion they might choose to do that. Yeah, it wasn't.
But it doesn't appear that 17th or 18th conversation had ever happened. So again, over that week, I tried to communicate with my the Jersey opposition, but that never came back. And I got a call 5 minutes before my 17th of October meeting, with the minister expressing some surprise that we were going to make the decision, which would have then been communicated to him, which was communicated then at 5:30. And I don't know what happened in that week. And that's only an answer Jersey can, if it indeed has its own scrutiny review at some point. But there was a period of time where there's a bit of radio silence coming from Jersey, and the amplification was actually turned out to be incorrect, because the 15th, the email from the 15th of October, which said that Jersey was going to make a decision, the minister was going to make a decision on the Thursday or Friday of that week, and then communicate it to his council of ministers on the 21st, never happened, but ours did.
Based on the responses you've given, I'm assuming, unless you correct me otherwise, that at the outset of the process, it was never envisaged that this was likely to be, that this was a possible outcome, that the islands would end up going separate ways, and therefore
politically, absolutely not.
No contingency was put in place in terms of the process to allow that. So, in other words, you because that had not been envisaged, in essence, you get to the 14th, 15th, and both islands have to find their own solution as to what they're going to do, because it's clearly the joint process has not worked as was intended. Is it fair to say that contingency at the outset was not envisaged, that this outcome was not envisaged?
Well, Deputy St Pierre seems to be looking at
Mr.
Steele.
It certainly wasn't front and centre.
Who are you asking, Deputy St Pierre?
I'm asking the panel.
Okay. What I'm absolutely certain of is when both islands went into this, we went to this with with the assumption that, again, as repeated a number of times by both islands, the Pan-Channel Island solution would be the best outcome. No two ways about that. And I honestly believe that my political opposition was of that mind, as I was as well. Was it envisaged we would get to this point? To answer your question, I don't think there was. And to answer your other question, was there actually a political contingency at the time? I don't think there was. So if that is indeed a criticism, I can accept that. But we weren't expecting to get to this point.
I think that's true. I mean, it certainly wasn't front and centre in anybody's minds. And I think at no point during the process, I mean, the officers from both islands worked remarkably well together. There was a lot of collaboration, really, really good joint working between all of the evaluators on both sides. And at no point did anybody, consider for one moment that I think we thought we'd get to a different place. It all happened really quite quickly at the end and quite suddenly around that period in time.
I think, if I may, I think there was a sense there might have been a some way of trying to bring the parties together at the end of that, but of course that's going to really be a political process, and that's kind of what was happening, Deputy Inda, really, is that with those meetings that you just talked about. So there were 2 or 3
There were
meetings,
2 meetings
with the chief ministers and the external relations ministers.
And we'd made our decision on the 17th. We communicated that with Deputy Morell. We got a response acknowledging receipt of it. I was asked very quickly not to by Deputy Tock and communicating via Jersey, effectively. This is a long story short, that we were not to communicate that publicly. And still, I had no reason to. I wasn't there to get my portrait on the wall or get one over on Jersey. That it was effectively a committee decision. I was quite happy to wait to have those 2 meetings and see if there was a way to get to a solution. So it would have been probably useful to get our team to work on the contracts 2 weeks earlier, but there was still an intent that the decision was a decision based on the information that we had in front of us. That was communicated to Jersey. We had 2 meetings with Mr. Deputy Farnham, Deputy Morell, and Deputy Gorst, including myself, Deputy Tock, and Deputy Farnham. It's the other Lyndon in my life, Deputy Trott, and there was a desire, a lot of that around regional relationships, to ensure that we got to the right decision. So we held our decision back for we held the notice of our decision back for a solid 2 weeks, to try and get to a point, and had not communicated that decision to either DFDS or Brittany Ferries.
Thank you.
Anything else on that?
Not on that.
Okay, I think it's probably quite an opportune moment just to take a short comfort break. If everyone could reconvene, please, at 11:05. Thank you. Okay. Right, Deputy St Pierre, if you'd like to resume.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a quick couple of questions, I think, which sort of follow on from the previous discussion. Just understanding the pricing and terms and conditions for freight and passengers under the Guernsey-only bid. Are they the same as the joint, as what was under the joint bid, or were they revised in any way?
Yeah, so they're essentially, well, they're covered in Schedule 3
Yep,
of the contract, and essentially they were the same under the Guernsey only as the joint one.
I'd be conscious not going into the actual detail of it, because there is an element of confidentiality there. Yes. But what we can say, that it's improved. I think I said in a previous answer that
improved on the pre-contract.
Yeah, that's right. It's improved on the pre-contract. But what I can say, and that the flattening of the rate card was important for both islands, and under the Guernsey only contract, those rate cards have been flattened, and the likelihood is that far more people will get greater access to better rates. In fact,
could you just explain that a little bit, because a lot of people listening to this won't actually understand the terminology around flattening rate cards, perhaps?
Was that your preference? Thank you.
The existing freight rate card has a number of pricing levels based on the number of lane meters of freight that you buy as a buyer. And I can't recall exactly how many levels there are today, but what we have done is we've flattened that. So the price as a retail consumer buying 1 lane meter is now closer to the price if you were the biggest buyer in the market. So we've squeezed the card together, and that was indeed one of the challenges that was presented to us previously. Was actually there's the way the freight rate card works doesn't encourage sufficient competition in the market. So what we've done is we've flattened that rate card so those higher discount levels are much closer to attain for other buyers in the market than they are today. In terms of the actual freight rates themselves, we've contracted for caps, but we've also contracted based on mean averages. So the mean average achievable fare is in the contract, and that will be comparable, so very, very similar to what we have today. And in fact, actually, if you look at the vehicle and the passenger pricing, again, very, very similar to what we have today. So we're not expecting to see, the public shouldn't expect to see increases in what they pay day to day for the pricing for vehicles and for passengers on the ferry.
Thank you.
But there's an improvement on freight, isn't there? There's likely to be.
Yeah. So the smaller buyers in the market should be able to get better freight rates than they do today.
If you're happy, Deputy, we could share that information with, obviously, in confidentiality with the panel, if that was helpful for you to see the background of that, if that's okay.
And again, Jersey in their announcement around DFDS said that there was a flat freight card. Is that, what's the difference between flattening and flat?
So the rate card we've agreed has, I think it has 5 or 6 tiers to it. The rate, well, I don't know exactly what. I can only speculate on what Jersey agreed, but based on the tender responses that we had sight of, they will have agreed a single rate for all buyers, regardless of volume. So everybody will pay exactly the same rate in the market, regardless of how many lane meters they buy.
And what are the advantages and disadvantages of that between the consumer and the ferry company?
Well, so I mean, as a consumer, they will achieve exactly the same rate, but what that probably means, in order to achieve the same mean average, the biggest buyers in the market would probably be paying more than they do today. So if you look at what we've agreed, the mean average will be the same as what we have today. I mean, there are more admin costs associated with dealing with smaller buyers. But what we've aimed to do is reduce the discount rates for the bigger buyers so that those discount rates are more attainable to buyers with less volume. One of the challenges previously was Those higher discount levels were only available to the very biggest buyers in the market.
Okay. Thank you.
Carry on.
Okay. Okay. Just moving on then to just explore the role of Brittany Ferries as the commercial and financial guarantor, and just understanding what assessment's been made on the financial stability of Brittany Ferries and understanding the strength of its balance sheet. What work has been done and what reassurance is there around that you're able to offer?
So Brittany Ferries, just to be clear, Brittany Ferries was the bidder. Condor wasn't the bidder. So a lot of the most of the financial analysis has been done on Brittany, but also on Condor.
Okay, the question still stands then. Just understanding the financial, the strength of Brittany's balance sheet, because obviously we know that Condor's balance sheet was under pressure because of the level of debt, but understanding Brittany's balance sheet then.
So Brittany has low levels of debt, and they were subject to the 5 or 6 financial tests that I previously referenced, and they passed.
And is there any guarantor of Brittany Ferries, again, given their ownership, or are you aware of any guarantor that's either part of the contract or separate from the contract, that there is somebody, a state actor perhaps, standing behind Brittany Ferries?
I'm not aware of that, but we might want to bring in Sarah Hutchinson.
2 seconds. Sorry, I'm just going to quickly check. There's a performance bond. Yeah. So Brittany Ferries provides a full performance and financial guarantee to Condor under the contract. In addition, there is a performance bond for £2.5 million, which is a third-party on-demand bond, which can be drawn upon in the event that any of the obligations of the contract are not delivered out by Brittany Ferries, or by Condor and Brittany Ferries kind of jointly. Additionally, the contract is set up such that, heaven forbid, if anything were to happen to Condor, Brittany Ferries immediately becomes liable as the primary operator under the contract, so there's a triggered novation. So Brittany Ferries is on the hook at all times, irrespective of what happens, and in addition there's a third-party performance bond, which is a demand bond for £2.5 million.
Okay, thank you very much. Condor, of course, has had significant long-term debts due to Guernsey Harbours in respect of harbour dues, and that's effectively extended credit terms. I mean, to all intents and purposes, it's a bit of a hidden subsidy that we've been providing them. Now, I understand from a response which Deputy Roffey gave in the States that level of debt has come down. Was that any part of the conversation that you were having in relation to Condor as to the clearance of that debt, or was that simply treated as an issue for the STSB and Guernsey Harbours as opposed to part of this contract?
I can answer that.
Thank you.
Because it didn't form part of the determination, but quite clearly, and this does concern me, but this is more at operational level. I was quite surprised that any firm can run up that kind of debt with one of our arms of government, and that came to me sometime in June or July, I think it was, of this year. It was fairly clear. Myself and Deputy Morrell wrote jointly to the old entity, requesting, if not demanding, that they clear that debt. Given the previous financial problems, I think the word that they were using under the not under the chief executive, it is the previous one. I think Guernsey, possibly Poole and Jersey, was being used almost as a credit line. And what really does surprise me, and something you might want to consider, Deputy Burford and members of Scrutiny, is how on earth we ever get to a position as Ireland where we effectively become a credit line for any supplier. I was genuinely surprised the amount of debt that was allowed to carry on at STSB level without it ever being raised, and they were quite nonchalant about it. But anyway, that was cleared at the time. But I think to in part answer your question, that was a process of the ITT that got that cleared, because we wanted that debt cleared as a point of principle. that was cleared but didn't form part of the decision-making process. But I think there's a greater question over how each of our governments manages its debt, which is possibly for another
Is there
day.
any provision in the contract for normal credit terms in relation to the use of the harbours, or is that simply a matter for the new entity in terms of its trading arrangement with Guernsey Harbours? In other words, has it been addressed in any way as part of the contract or not?
The contract is with the Committee for Economic Development and the concession holder, so it wouldn't really be the right place to put that.
No,
so
fine.
it isn't in the contract, but that's not to say that Harbours through STSB couldn't put in and shouldn't put in suitable arrangements.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Just a few questions on the fleet. So it's been announced that the fleet's going to be streamlined to 3 ferries, 2 conventional ferries and a single fast ferry. Do you believe that size of fleet to be paying the routes?
That's been assessed, and none of this comes with no risk. We've either got there is an element of all high-speed ferries. And the only comparison I can give is potentially in horse racing. You've got flat race horses trying to do steeplechase across quite rough waters. There is almost certainly an element of risk. I think it's good that we've got the conventional ferries. It probably, again, would have been better under Pan Channel Island, but we are satisfied with the Clipper. The Clipper is on 24 standby, living somewhere else on Brittany Ferries network, so she's not being sold, but the Liberation is likely to be, along with the Goodwill.
And in the event of a situation where perhaps one of those ferries is on routine maintenance and there are problems with 1 or 2 of the others, there are provisions to bring in other ferries from the broader fleet.
So there's provision for the Clipper, which will be deployed elsewhere on Brittany Ferries fleet, but because she's based in Portsmouth, she can very quickly come onto the Guernsey route. So there's and of course the maintenance is pre-planned up to a year in advance. So Brittany Condor will know when those periods are and will adjust, and that's when the Clipper will come in to cover those schedules. Okay. Also, just to add some reassurance, in the ITT, the minimum service requirements were specified both in terms of the number of rotations to and from Guernsey and in terms of the capacity on the ships as well to meet passenger, their cars and freight. So that was set at 120% of levels recorded in 2019. So we're confident that there's more than sufficient capacity on the fleet to be deployed to meet that.
Thank you.
If I could just come in,
sure.
Deputy Burford, could I just try and clarify whether or not the States of Guernsey is still paying contingency for backup if necessary?
Until the end of December.
Up until the end of December. And what is that financial commitment?
It's €700,000 split between the two islands. About 350,000 euros per island.
Per month.
Per month, sorry. Beg your pardon,
so
yes, per month.
Jersey and Guernsey are paying an equal sum?
Yeah.
Yes. And the contract was quarterly, which is why, having entered into the Q4 contract, it runs until the end of this quarter.
Okay.
Where is that money coming from?
Policy and Resources.
Policy and Resources Committee agreed it, I think. I think from the budget reserve for 24, but I'd have to check and clarify, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Right. Just coming back briefly to the Islander, which is under this contract and generally, in any case, chartered out to Condor. Is that on full normal commercial rates?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Deputy Fairclough.
I'd like to just spend some time exploring the timetables and routes. Sorry.
Do you mind if we just deal with the refleeting? Sorry, before we go on to timetable, is that all right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry, it's just because we were talking about the fleet. I just wanted to pick up on Ms Hutchison's comment earlier about the commercial arrangements for retonnage. So if I understood your response in the first session, you said that there are mandatory commitments in relation to refurbishment of the current fleet, but there's a commercial arrangement to be agreed in relation to retonnage. Could we just expand on that a little bit more as to what we understand over what time frame that negotiation is going to take place, and what the triggers are, what are the likely range of outcomes from, and what are the parameters that could either leave us with a refleeted, retonnaged fleet or not. So,
in the first instance, there's a substantial maintenance programme going into the existing fleet as it is at the moment, of which we will ensure that investment goes into those boats. We'll review it every year, and that takes a line of the majority of the vessels into the early 2030s. So that is, it doesn't look like a new boat, but it's a reinvestment in the current fleet to ensure they're up to a standard and they maintain their life. Within the contract, there is an opportunity for both Brittany Ferries and the States of Guernsey to look at what for the want of a better word, a Voyager 2 might look like. Now that will be negotiations not for this term, definitely not, possibly towards the end of next term, if not the second term. But the assurance I can give you at the moment is the next 7 or 8 years, there is no public investment at all. There may eventually be in another government's time an element, and we're going to use the word socialising of the fleet. There may be an opportunity there is an opportunity within the contract for Brittany Ferries to discuss with a future States of Guernsey what kind of role the retonnaging may play, and whether they do it all or in part it's some kind of joint venture with Guernsey. And I hope that answers your question.
Does anyone else wish to add anything to that?
Just to add that it's anticipated a Voyager will need to be replaced around 2035, so decisions in respect to the retonnaging need to be made around 2030. That kind of, because the lead time for a new ship would be 2 to 3 years.
So effectively, I suspect the end of next term, going into the new term, would be my best guess.
But to be clear, is it not a JV is almost inevitably the outcome, isn't it? I mean, I just don't see how, based on the size of the market and the financials, that on a solo route with Guernsey as a solo route, that there is the financial capacity for anybody to acquire a Voyager 2 entirely on their own balance sheet without some support. I mean, JV is inevitable, isn't it?
No, not necessarily. There's a Chinese saying that says, "Beware how small your dreams are, because they may eventuate." We've got a 15-year contract. We've got boats coming up from France directly to Guernsey. We'll be marketing strongly to try and get those boats filled. That obviously adds profit. There are opportunities for Guernsey. If we start building properly through our capital, that's really quite important for the vessels. It's interesting, as we had the conversations with both DFDS and Condor Ferries, there's an obligation on the islands to make these work as well. Because what I didn't realise, and this is, it wasn't necessarily in the initial conversations over the ITT about how great Guernsey is and what you're going to do for us. It's actually, and what you're going to do for me. They were actually asking, what are you going to do for us? They were asking about our population. They were asking about our capital expenditure, because these are all things that get freight moving into the island. So I think we're a few years. This contract has to settle down for 2 or 3 years. To see if the Marlow Guernseys work, if the current fleet is working, and that decision will be for a future government. So the presumption that it can't work is just purely opinion.
Okay. I was only going to add slightly. It's not an unreasonable conclusion at the moment, is it? I think I can understand why that would be there.
I'd certainly like to rely on more than Chinese proverbs to ensure the refleetage of our ships. I just want to explore the obligations of the islands, which Deputy Inder's referenced there. Are you talking generically that it's now the responsibility of the island to help grow the market, or are there actual contractual obligations built into the contract?
I think there's basically we are a small island, and you've heard me say it before in the States. The reality is that Guernsey, if Jersey is in the Goldilocks zone where it's hit the £100,000, where the Kentucky Fried Chicken works in Jersey but doesn't work in Guernsey, and the bowl works in Jersey but doesn't work in Guernsey, we have to accept as an island that we only have a certain scale. So we are under obligation to ensure, genuinely through marketing, through tourism, through investing in harbours, to ensure that there's a symbiotic relationship between our island and our ferry service. So that obligation is not contracted, but I think by policy we've got to recognise that there are limits to an island of 65,000 and advantages elsewhere, 24 miles away down the road. So I think embedded in policy should be at some point an obligation to at least recognise that we can't just sit there on our own expecting things to just happen. We have to build our island towards the development of our ferry service, because they are part of how we get everything into this island. But that's more political. But Mr. Wakeling, you want to? Oh, which one is it?
Just to reinforce, really, look, the schedule provides opportunity. So it's not an obligation per se in the contract. It's the way the schedule has been set out provides opportunity in two ways. Number one, for day trippers from France, which we don't currently have access. Number two, there's no current fast ferry across the Western Channel. So by starting the day in St Malo and going north and doing a return, we have the opportunity to build UK-France, France-UK traffic. The financial model that's been put forward by Brittany, however, is based on the today's scenario. So there's no assumption in there of any growth in terms of day trippers or in terms of this cross-channel market. So I think it's fair to say we see upside and opportunity in that financial model. And I think to your previous question, Deputy Saint-Pierre, I think therefore we don't yet know what the outcome will be in terms of reinvestment. We don't know what will be available to reinvest. So it's possible that there will be Brittany will have the means to invest in the fleet moving forward.
Before Mr. Wakeling comes in, can I just probe Mr. Steele on just the reassurance around the sensitivity analysis on that financial model? You've obviously spoken about the potential upside, but presumably we've taken where we are now and there's been an assessment of the downside risks.
Brittany did some sensitivity analysis, so they created 2 or 3 different models. Yes,
which you've seen and reviewed.
We have. Well, I've seen them in passing, but our financial colleagues have done our financial civil service officers have done the financial evaluation.
Yeah.
Mr. Wakeling and then Deputy Inder.
I was only going to make a very brief point to really support what Deputy Inder had said, but when we did the market testing phase of the tender process, so going back to the back end of Q1 of this year, the businesses that we were talking to, clearly Guernsey and Jersey, or Guernsey only as it is quite a significant investment for those businesses too. So I think the point is that they want an understanding that Guernsey and Jersey have an ambition to grow the market and to invest in the infrastructure around the ports and the harbours that enable the businesses to move with other trends in the industry as well. That was the only point.
What's also, immediately once we knew the contract was heading in the right direction and we'd signed it, I'd already had a meeting with External Relations with a view and Chamber of Commerce, looking away how we start developing those markets, and one of those markets may be, and we're in the process of writing to the Chamber of Commerce in St Malo. We want to know what the opportunities are at the moment. It may be the case that before the end of term that we have a trade show in Guernsey. And let's actually see what kind of what kind of products, what kind of food, what kind of relationships we can actually make with France. Because at the moment, in this sort of weird way that our food chain works, you can go and buy a tray of flat peaches at the wrong end of the season for about €11 in France, yet you can't get them for less than £8 from Marks and Spencer's. There's a kind of an economic madness the way our food chain works, where we are basically staring at fresh veg, we are staring at aggregates, wood supplies, and we just, again, by policy, that is a criticism of our government. We just don't look as south enough as we should do. But to assist in terms of the positivity, those conversations are already starting. And to build on the French day trippers, I think it's next week, both Brittany Ferries and our Visit Guernsey team are now discussing is how do we start leveraging this. We need to get our French visitors, because we're already seeing that. The investment in the Victor Hugo Centre, which may or may not happen in the next 2 or 3 years, is all really quite good news. But we've got to get that working. That won't work just because we go to France every few months. It entirely will work on the idea of freight and people coming to the island, St Malo to Guernsey over the peak period. So we are under obligation to make it work. And my point again, don't accept everything will just happen by itself. We have to work this ourselves.
Acknowledging that there are some significant challenges with French day trippers post-Brexit because of the inability.
Right.
Yeah.
But,
to travel.
We'll work through that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad we've come onto the wider economy, because in terms of timetables and routes, and obviously there's a lot of public interest in this particular aspect. If I could ask what economic impact analysis, if any, took place on the loss of frequency on the inter-island route as a result of what happened?
I think if I can answer that question at the moment. There's no two ways about it. We had spoken to some of the freight suppliers. Without wanting to misquote them, I think there's a 40-foot container of various goods that go in and out the islands on a daily service. So in its quantum, it's not an awful lot, but the importance of what's in there to the supplier is very important indeed. So we need to look at that, and I'll explain how we're going to do that. And quite clearly, socially as well, we do work with our islands. We've seen, and I've shared that with you, that we've lost something like 50% of our inter-island travel over the last 10 years, and basically inter-island at the moment isn't going to improve that. And of course, quite clearly, sports and social clubs. So we've got horse boxes which go to Guernsey and Jersey. We've got motor cars, but it's not just about foot passengers. If it helps, and we're not there yet. Before Jersey went down its own ITT path, myself and Deputy Morale did discuss and basically had a conversation. Said whatever happens out of this, we have to look at the inter-island route. So we still maintain that relationship. We've had a similar conversation with Mr. Gorst, Mr. Farnham, and Deputy Morale, Deputy Trott, and Deputy Latoc about half an hour before they announced that. So we are still, again, committed to working on inter-island. Also, within the scheduling at the moment, Brittany Ferries have suggested, they've asked for expressions of interest of dropping one boat into Jersey per week, and equally we are now waiting for the Jersey schedules that might do something similar. So that's we're on a path, and that ability to put a boat into Jersey or receive one from Guernsey is actually within the contract, but it has to be on something called mutuality. For example, when Jersey isn't going to accept 5 Brittany Ferry boats into Jersey a day and none to DFDS, so there has to be some mutuality in there. But what I can say is that those conversations are ongoing and they will happen quickly, and I think both islands are quite determined to ensure that we get some get into a better position than we are right now, and I'm absolutely certain that will improve, because I doubt Deputy Morale or certainly Deputy India isn't going to be the first person to say we're not allowing Guernsey and Jersey people to trade together, socialise together, or play sports together. It's just going to take longer than expected.
I'm sure people will be reassured to hear what is now happening and what's going on, but the question was whether or not any economic impact analysis was done as part of that week-long process when there was going to be a substantial change in contract. Was any thought given to the economic impact of that decision, particularly with regards to a lack of an inter-island route?
I don't think, well, in a week's time, you're not going to get a load of consultants spending far too much money telling you what you already know, that it's going to be a problem. So the short answer is, from a political point of view, I think the short answer is no. But my officers may have done some. Hold on, maybe Gareth and Sarah have got a different assessment. But pretty obviously, it was never going to help.
We do obviously we do economic analysis on lots of air and sea routes to and from Guernsey, and I think as Deputy Inder has said before, we're aware that the Guernsey-Jersey route in particular, both by air and sea, is one that we would like to see more passengers and freight on. So yes, we have done economic analysis, particularly based on passenger-only ferry services. So we see there is an opportunity there. Definitely, and also looking at connections to Air France as well. But specifically for this, for the ro-ro services, it's not something that we've specifically done for this. But
Mr. Jones, whether consideration has been given to what frequency of inter-island travel would be considered appropriate to serve our community?
I'd say we haven't yet got into that detail.
But I fully imagine that these are the sorts of issues that are now being addressed through discussions with Jersey.
And it's true to say that our colleagues, civil service colleagues in Jersey, are just as keen to develop it from an area point of view. So
I was just going
to say, presumably you must have something in mind. Even from your very early determinations on possibly a joint bid or whatever, of what the ideal frequency by ferry inter-island would be each week.
Yes, we do. What was the original? We just have to refer back to the original ITT.
For the Pan-Island bid, the minimum service requirements were for 7 rotations a week.
So a daily service.
A daily service in the peak period. That is.
Okay, thank you.
And without wishing to make decisions that are probably going to be made in the coming days and weeks, that's the aspiration, is it, to have a daily service between Guernsey and Jersey?
Certainly the aspiration at the start of the tender, wasn't it?
At the start of the tender, whether that still maintains it.
During the peak, that is.
During the peak.
July and August is the peak period.
And what would be the frequency out of peak season?
Back, the off peak, which is winter, and that would be 2 a week. That's winter is November to March.
Okay.
So that was what was specified in the original.
And with the timetable such as it is at the moment, there's only one movement between Guernsey and Jersey, as I understand it. But is that because we're in a winter season?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is Condor has I should stop using that word. Brittany Ferries have announced on their scheduling and have asked for expressions of interest of putting a vessel into Jersey. But of course they need to get permission from Jersey to do that. And as I understand,
it explains why you can't buy a ticket for it.
Well, yeah, because it's based on expressions of interest. Now, quite clearly, until Jersey's been through this process, everyone's calmed down. We've got into our positions, and we start talking properly together, which will happen and happen very quickly. As soon as you split from a jurisdiction, the sovereignty over the ramp is entirely at the will of either island. There is nothing more important than that, the 25 metres of steel in front of you, because everything comes through those ports. So I can't answer your questions entirely now, because Jersey ports haven't agreed, as far as I understand, to that vessel going alongside her ramp, and equally we've got no indication of the intention coming north. So it's a bit early. All I can re-emphasise is determination by both islands to get into a better position than we have at the moment, because effectively our lifeline links aren't the inter-island. They're not determined as lifeline links. The Guernsey-Jersey routes, they're basically optional, but they're not optional for those who want to actually go to trade in between the two islands. But they are basically deemed as optional.
But because I imagine ramp access and timings are going to be absolutely critical to those
Correct.
negotiations.
Correct.
When might we hear what the outcome of those negotiations will be?
I can't answer that, but it won't be before Christmas, and I'm hoping by the end of January.
Okay. More generally on the timetable, are you as a committee content with the timetable as it stands?
Yes, I think we are. I think the opportunities, again, this is about opportunities. This is about these things having to work. Basically, vessels coming up in France and the day trip service. It looks like there's a great bypassing Jersey could actually be an advantage and provides opportunity rather than Guernsey being the second fiddle, because Jersey markets itself all over the Brittany and Normandy region. Guernsey doesn't so much, because we're always and by the way, while you're in Jersey you can go to Guernsey as well if you feel like it, but the opportunity here, and this will be proven at Deputy Fairclough whether it's right or wrong over the next 2 years. I think this year and next year will be critical. One, you have to start building the market and saying, look, Guernsey exists, please come direct. We've seen a great indication last year that we're seeing far more French people in the island than we were, and we need to improve on that, notwithstanding Deputy St Pierre's point about the limitations we've got on the, I think called the ETA, is that correct? The ETA. But the French are going to have to get passports to come to Guernsey.
Could I just ask whether the contract as it stands permits for a different operator to pick up the inter-island route?
It's based on what we call, I'm going to use the word mutuality, not pick up the route. If, as we have, the two contenders are Brittany Ferries and now Condor. And I'm going to, this is DFDS. If Brittany Ferries is going to drop a vessel into Jersey, then the mutuality dictates within the contract that should be reciprocated, and further negotiations have to be based on reciprocation. But there's no possibility to stick a further competition. That might not be the correct question you're asking. Further competition into.
I think just by way of explanation, perhaps the thing is there was a report, I think, in the press recently about a very small operator looking to increase travel between Guernsey and Jersey, and presumably if you're not using the Ro-Ro ramp, then another operator, even if they only had 40 seats, could operate.
Yeah, we've invested in Montreal Express and basically provided some services there, and we've heard of other people. There's something called Islands Unlimited, which should sort of turn up as well. So I'm sorry, for the purpose of this conversation, I'm only thinking about Ro-Ro ramps.
No, sorry.
So that's my. But yes, I'm going alongside in one of the other berths with foot passengers. We're effectively a free port. But again, foot passengers are great, but they aren't the horse riders, the hill climb riders, and ultimately we are going to need something that looks like what I would call freight, at least cars, being able to tow something, or at least cars with lots of things in it. I don't think it will work entirely. It won't be satisfactory enough just to have foot passengers.
So was there any consultation then with the freight operators on the logistical impacts of a Guernsey-only service?
Yes, there was.
And what did that entail?
We had a meeting with stakeholders. They were satisfied with the northern routes and the southern routes, so that was in the main satisfactory. But again, there was concern about the trade between the islands. I think I mentioned in one of the meetings, and I'm just for repeating myself, and I'm not being facetious anyway, that we believe there's something like a 40-foot container goes inter-island on a regular basis. And the importance of what's in that isn't one person's 40-foot container. It's important. For example, the Portuguese rolls always come up from Jersey, from their bakery, and one of the garages sends cars quite regularly to Jersey as well. So that was expressed upon us about the dissatisfaction of that. And I'm absolutely certain between the two islands we're going to have a mature, grown-up conversation on how to work through that.
I would imagine that conversation is going to have to happen quickly when there are businesses who are trying to make all the necessary arrangements.
Yeah, but it's also worth the operating agreement for Jersey still exists, so that will be transacting between the islands until the end of March. So it doesn't stop on January. We have time, but I wouldn't give us an awful lot of time The ferry schedule as it is, with Jersey's operating agreement, will carry on till the end of March. So in the meantime, nothing's stopping today. It means it gives us an opportunity to work through the muddle that has been the inter-island links, and I'm quite certain by the end of January we will have got to that point.
Mr. Wakeling.
And to a specific question, Deputy Fairclough, once it became apparent it was likely to move to a Guernsey-only service, as the schedules were being discussed, there were 2 meetings with various businesses and their representatives, one that was officers and one that was officers plus also Brittany Ferries and their planning team as well. And we also received other approaches from businesses through that period as well, advising on particular issues. So,
was the Civil Contingencies Authority engaged at any point as a result of what happened?
The Civil Contingency Authorities had a briefing. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, just on the wider point of the wider economy and what's within the mandate of your committee, some of those in Guernsey's tourism and hospitality sector have expressed dismay at the islands going their own way with a ferry provider, especially in terms of that inter-island connectivity point. So what is now being done to address those concerns?
I think this is probably the third time, with great respect, I've said that we won't get anything by Christmas, but those conversations are ongoing and we will have a solution by the end of January. But also the hospitality associations are also positively very keen to work on the new St Malo to Marlow to Guernsey route. So there's some positivity in that as well. And we have a tendency in politics to focus on the negativity. There's a lot of very good news about and I will go, and I'm happy to go through them. We have the certainty. We have a contract. We have spent 15 years out of contract. That risk has been absolutely massive to the island. We do have the fleet investment. We have direct routes to St Malo. We have opportunity after opportunity, Deputy Fairclough. And I do wish sometimes, even though I'm in a scrutiny hearing and it's no criticism of you, that we would look at some of the good things that have come out of it, not always a negativity.
I think also to add to that, I think we can go a bit faster with some of those discussions once we're cited on what the arrangements between Government of Jersey and DFGS are going to be, and when the schedule's published on the 13th of December, as we understand. We're not involved in those conversations, as you'd expect.
Thank you.
Could I just pick up on the CCA question just to clarify? So you've kept the CCA informed during the various stages of this process. But the CCA have not made any decisions. It's simply a case that you've been briefing them.
They've been in an advisory capacity, and it's worth, again, for the record, it seems almost perverse. The President of the Committee of Economic Development is not a full member of the CCA. He can only be co-opted into that to act in an advisory capacity and doesn't have any vote at all.
Thank
Make
you.
of that what you will.
Deputy Secretary.
Yeah, just Deputy Indy, you referred to the there will be a mature, grown-up conversation, quote unquote, with Jersey. I mean, clearly the relationship has been under strain. I think it would be fair to say since the 14th, 15th, 16th of October. So really, just seeking to understand. I mean, do you think the wider relationship between the islands has been damaged by the disintegration of the joint tender process, and without seeking to attribute blame and responsibility, but how has it impacted the inter-island relationship?
Deputy Fuller might be able to answer some of it.
What I can say is, since the Guernsey decision was made, I've been with my ESS colleagues to Jersey to talk to our opposite numbers. We had a very, very constructive, positive engagement. During that meeting, the Chief Minister of Jersey popped his head through the door, and there was warmth in the exchange. So I think this needs to be viewed as a business arrangement between the islands, which hasn't gone perhaps the way we might have liked or preferred, but in other areas we are continuing to cooperate very well and on a friendly basis with our Jersey colleagues.
I think that's quite similar. And again, I've explained that as Jersey embarked on its new ICT process, Deputy Morell and I spoke about this, and we understood, to your point, that the inter-island, we must deal with that at some point, but it won't be dealt with by whatever decision they made out of their ITT. Half an hour before Jersey announced the DFDS as the preferred bidder for the new IT process. I was in a Teams meeting, an emergency Teams meeting with the people I keep mentioning, Deputy Clock, myself, Deputy Farnham, Deputy Trott, Deputy Morell and Deputy Gorst. It was very cordial. It was them informing us where we are. It was very cheery. And both, again, we looked at quickly. This is just a single decision that the, to use your words, Deputy St Pierre has disintegrated. It's not necessarily disintegrated, it just hasn't happened. But that decision is that decision, and then we move on to the next decision. So I generally don't think that it means it's the end of the relationship, we're all going to fold our hands and not talk to each other. That would be the actions of a child. And I don't think either islands are children. They've just come to different decisions. It's as simple as that.
Mr. Wakeling, you want to come in?
No, I was only going to add, there's lots of ongoing work with officers as well in different areas of the state, supporting different committees that carries on and will continue to work.
Sorry, just one final question on that. Is there anything you would have done differently with the benefit of hindsight?
No. I think, to answer you, I think in some defence of Jersey, not that I'm here to mudsling, I think they had a fully formed policy long before Guernsey did. So if that is a criticism of Guernsey, and it's almost, you've got to remember that Jersey has, it's got deep pockets and with lots of money in it and long arms. Guernsey's got short arms and no money. And we don't, irrespective of the narrative that we hear sometimes, when we haven't got thousands of civil servants with different roles doing different things. Mr. Wakeland here, often he pops up, whether he's doing, he's doing windmills for some other work group. He pops up on ferry services, and this gentleman here, along with a number of others, less named officers, tend to turn up with multiple responsibilities. So I think, but Guernsey doesn't want to pay for it. On things at this strategic level, I don't think it's not we're unserved. We just don't have the resources we always need. So if I was to advise a new government, which almost certainly we will be on June the 18th. There are things within the system of government which simply don't work, and I won't have that conversation here, but that's just my political view. It is clearly a nonsense that the two great economic enablers, which are ports and harbours in the islands, sit under a trading board where quite clearly a new, more powerful economic development needs to be the way forward.
Because you did say you wouldn't enter into that.
But he asked me if I'd have done everything different.
But now we're rejigging the mandate of economic development. So
yeah, but I was going to explain as I can't do anything different under my system of government. So I'm either here to talk or I'm not.
Could you tell me what you said earlier in your answer, where you referred to Jersey? You believe Jersey had a fully formed policy much earlier than you did. What do you mean by fully formed policy on this?
Well, they had. I think it was bad enough to refer to some of my timetable. I think I was introduced to the Jersey team sometime in 2022. Towards the end of 2022, there was an on-island meeting, and they had gone down a route of basically, as a general, they wanted us to get involved with one of the bigger consultants. They were ahead of us in looking at the risks around ferry services in Guernsey and Jersey.
So they got started sooner than
they got started sooner than us, and
okay,
actually extended into the previous term as well.
Okay.
So some of these conversations are happening pre-COVID. So this happened before. So I think they were ahead of the game. They were more, because bear in mind, David Burford, they actually were coming to the end of their operating agreement. So we were sort of bumbling along on this weird MOU, and I genuinely think that was a mistake. So to answer Deputy Fairclough's questions, I didn't, with some hindsight, I'd have a fully formed policy, and I don't think I'd have entered into an MOU in the first place, but that was before my time, so I hope that answers your
I think
question.
Deputy Secretary Pierre, you've got one question to finish up.
Yeah,
with,
just a quick question in relation to the amount of information that's in the public domain. The MOU and the previous operating agreement was in the public domain. Is it intended that the new operating agreement will be in the public domain?
We have to publish it, don't we?
It has to be published under the RoRo law, so it
Yeah.
will need to be published in due
Okay,
course.
thank you very much.
Okay. Do you have anything else, Deputy Fairclough?
But just picking up on that, I think you've said there's going to be an annual review under the contract. So that will be publicised, and presumably, will it be taken to the States? Will it be open to debate, or will it simply be put out into the public domain?
Right now, I can't answer that question. I know that as under the contract, which is written with economic development, that will be reviewed within the committee. Will be reviewed by economic development. Whether it goes for noting, whether it goes for debate, it'd be a bit strange, I think, if what is a fairly standard document to ensure that a contractor is complying with the terms of the contract ended up in the States of Guernsey. So if I were advising in a new term, the truth is the answer is no. It's really up to economic development to hold the contractor to his feet to the fire.
Thank you.
I think that brings us to a tidy close there. So I'd like to thank all the witnesses for coming along and participating today. Our next scrutiny hearing is on the 15th of January with Policy and Resources. So thank you, everybody, and the hearing is now closed.
Thank you.